Hello, welcome to today's review. Oh, frabjous day, Kalukale. I've finally finished with the Canterbury Tales. Not this particular volume, as I have mentioned in a couple of previous videos. I listened in audiobook, Blackstone audio, and used this Penguin edition translated by Neville Coghill as a backup, which is where I learned a lot about the Canterbury Tales. So in my first video I talked a little bit about the Canterbury Tales, the framing, the reason I was reading it, etc. And I'm going to try and not repeat that too much. I also talked somewhat about the general prologue, The Knight's Tale, and I believe I covered the Miller and Reeves and Cook's Tales as well. Miller and Reeves at least. And then there was another one which was part of a road trip where I basically raved a little bit about the Prioress's Tale and a couple of others. It might have been, which one was it? It was the two where they were knocking shades off each other. Was it the Physician and the Pardoner? No, it was the Friar and the Summoner. That's it. Anyhow, what I'm saying is there's other videos out there that you should probably watch first. It was a journey. It was a big journey. Though the audiobook was a great idea, this is the first time I've ever listened to all or read all of the Canterbury Tales from beginning to end. I only cheated once, and that was hard, but I did manage that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the order because I think the order matters more than I realize. Now, normally when I'm reading a work of fiction, I will read it without watching other people's reviews or reading about it. I want to make up my own opinion about what I'm reading. With something like Chaucer or the Hemskringla or something like that, it actually helps if you are finding out about it as you go because of the historical element. And I have no official history background, and I've never studied literature academically, so I need all the help I can get with certain elements of this. I do very much like the fact that I was learning about the era and about the book while I was reading or listening to it, and I learned a lot. It was great. I would occasionally break to hear certain elements of it spoken in Middle English because this one was a translated version into day-to-day English, or as it was put in the intro, rendered in modern English. So not translated as Neville here did, but rendered, and I find that vastly amusing for no particular reason. So 14th century novel obviously is going to be fascinating in many regards, and it was hard to read in many regards too. If you listen to it in Middle English, it's beautiful and lyrical and poetic, and you can get a sense of what it's saying, even though individual words might not be ones you can understand. So I've learned so much from reading it, and I'm glad about that. One of the things I learned is that academics are undecided as to whether this is considered a finished work or not, or if Chaucer had meant to write more. I would swing to the fact that he probably meant to write more, though maybe not as much more as originally he intended. So the framing is you've got about 30 pilgrims who gather together in the Tabard Inn, which is a real inn, and they're going on a pilgrimage, which means a completely different thing back then to what it means today, to Canterbury. And their host suggests they all tell tales to entertain the company along the way. 2 tales there and 2 tales back. That was the original brief, or the original concept that Chaucer had, and that would have made it over about 120 tales or so. And then prologues and epilogues and stuff on top. Huge project. But the tales, as we've got them today, basically end at night. At the end of one day, it's getting dark. The host asks one last person to tell a tale, and that's the end of it. What Chaucer didn't do, and we all know that, is arrange it. So the writings are on different fragments, and there's a lot of argument about the order. So at different times they have been described as fragment 1 through to 10, or group A through to I, including a B1 and a B2. The order I've got them in this book is slightly different to the order in the Blackstone audio. And two stories that were edited and were only described in brief in the actual volume are told in full in the audio version, and I can really see why a modern edition would edit them out and why a modern person would have problems with them. I had problems with them. Okay, let's talk about the Blackstone audio. Blackstone audio is the reason why I was a bit mystified part of the time, because it doesn't have an index. Now, if you are about to go online and Google for the index, what the AI tells you, don't believe that. It isn't entirely correct about the narrators, and I don't believe it's entirely correct about the order. The order in terms of groupings starts with the general prologue, the Knight's Tale, the Miller's Tale, the Reeve's Tale, and the Cook's Tale. That is fragment 1. And I think most people would agree that they belong in that order altogether. But after that, you've got fragment B1, which is the Man of Law's Tale. Then you've got fragment B2, which is often placed you've got group B1, the Man of Law's Tale, which is usually interpreted as fragment 2, but B2 is often interpreted as fragment 7, and it's a long one. I'm pretty sure that the audio had B2 directly after B1. Then you've got group C, which is often interpreted as fragment 6, and it all gets messy. So, shall we mention a little bit about the individual stories? If we follow the grouping, just for ease of conduct. Bird, what are you doing? I'm not sure that I mentioned the Cook's Tale in either of my previous review. So the cook is allegedly one of the two people that might have been real people. I did make a note about that at some point, but I can't find the note I meant. Pilgrimage, essentially Middle English. It was told in Middle English. Very pretty. Okay, I do not know where I left the note. How annoying. Okay, so the cook is largely thought by some academics at least to have been based on a real person who was also a cook and whose name appears somewhere on the internet. By all means, go look for it. Now, this tale continues, is the last one in fragment 1 or group A, and it shows a downgrade. It might be that the original concept of Chaucer was to have an elevating tale and a more bawdy or common tale, so that different people who like different things get swings and roundabouts, as it were. The Knight's Tale is very definitely a classic love story, Greek myth inspired, would please everyone no matter high their stature. The second one is bawdy, and the Cook's Tale even more so, the last one in that particular segment. And it talks about an apprentice called Perkins who is fond of drinking and dancing. He's released by his master and moves in with a friend who also loves to drink and who comes to a bad end. But this, I believe, is one where the cook gets so drunk that he falls off his horse and is helped back onto the horse by the man of law. And this would be why fragment 2 or group B, the Man of Law's Tale, often comes after the first grouping, because he helps the cook back onto his horse and then he tells his tale. Pretty sure I've described the Man of Law's Tale. I know I raved extensively about the Wife of Bath's Tale and the Friar's Tale and the Summoner's Tale. That's fragment largely considered D, and it's the Wife of Bath is still the standout, most amazing, by far the most contemporary enjoyment to be had out of any of these tales. That character, whose name is Alison, I believe. Was it Alison? I think it was Alison. And is very ably narrated in the Blackstone by Amelia White, is told with rare humour and feel it's an older woman who has humour and realism about the world, and feels more like a real person than pretty much anything else in all of these. Okay, then we have the two that I talked about on the road trip, the Friar's Tale, where the friar vilifies a corrupt summoner, and who interacts with the devil, and the summoner who's gets back at the friar by telling about a bad friar. Okay, now we are into a group which is probably either E or 4, depending, and the Clerk's Tale. So this is probably what today would be considered more philosophical, and it's the tale of Griselda, a young woman whose husband tests her loyalty in a series of pretty hideous torments. It's meant to herald to the book of Job, according to people who study these things and know about them. But basically it's a marquis in Italy somewhere who is a nice guy, but maybe a bit feckless, and he's begged by his populace to please marry and produce an heir to reduce their uncertainty. And actually, the Marquis is probably one of the first examples where I could see Chaucer doing something that he does really throughout, especially with the prioress, which I think might be important. Chaucer doesn't pass judgment and doesn't say anything negative about any of these pilgrims when he's describing them in the introduction or in the prologues or any of that. But he does have a sly way of letting his reader or listener know their characteristics that may not be so good. So the way the Marquis of Piedmont is described is clearly meant to be, oh, he's this lovely guy, everyone likes him, but he's also a bad Marquis. He doesn't manage, he doesn't govern, he spends all his days hunting and having a good time. And it's an unusual story, and the story is one that I feel could really be used in a very contemporary way. It's not dated, which is something that's weird to say about a story that was crafted hundreds of years ago. So anyway, this Marquis has agreed to marry, and the preparations are all underway, and no one knows who he's going to marry. And who he's going to marry is a peasant called Griselda. She and her father live in total poverty in a hut that he's often ridden past on his way to the fields hunting. So he does take her in marriage, and he basically torments her for her whole life. Now I think about it, I probably did mention this one in the road trip. Better stop now. It's deceptive and quirky, and Griselda herself doesn't come across as a particularly modern woman. She's basically a symbol for acceptance and good wifehood. I am not a huge fan of medieval notion of good wifehood, so there's that. But the tale itself is actually quite interesting and could well stand the test of time. So the other fragment in number 4, aside from the Clerk's Tale, is the Merchant's Tale. And in the Merchant's Tale, you have him lamenting the cruelty of his spouse. So this fragment seems to relate to wives, whether they're good or bad. Good being basically do whatever they're told, however stupid it is, like having their child carried away to be murdered in the woods, very Snow White. That was the last one. Or you've got the merchant who says that his wife is not very nice at all. And in a illustration of the fact that a bad wife is a bad wife, he talks about a 60-year-old knight who becomes enamored with the idea of marriage and marries a very young and beautiful woman. His friends advise him that it might be a good idea to marry a slightly older woman who's more contemporary with him, but no, he wants that sexy young one, so he gets her. And January is the name of the night. That's it. So January marries some young woman, May. Ah, yes. Very, very calendar-like, aren't we? But meanwhile, this old knight squire falls in love with May. And eventually he gives her a love letter and they kind of hook up. She's a very young woman married to a very old man in a way that would be largely condemned today. But But it was acceptable in medieval times. Though I think it's quite interesting and contemporary that January's friends were advising him to choose better than choose a very young woman to marry at his age. And remember, 60, the age of 60 back in the 1300s would have felt much older then than it does today. Anyhow, January eventually goes blind, though we don't know how, and May, his wife, and Damien, his squire, create this convoluted plot to get into a garden, and the squire climbs into the tree, and then May climbed into the tree after, and they're going to consummate their passion, as it were, in the tree. I feel sure they could have done better than that. However, the gods intervene here, and as soon as they both get into the tree and down to business, the god Pluto gives January back his sight so he can see what's happening. I don't know. This was a weird one. It felt very peculiar, very antiquated, and I'm not quite sure what it was trying to say. Aside from the obvious, I'm not quite sure what it was trying to get at. I don't think I got it. After this tale, there's an epilogue in which the host himself complains about his wife, but it seems to me that he does it in such a way that he is also kind of criticizing the tale itself. Not sure. Okay, so next we have the squire, and here we are in fragment 5, or group F. And so far, I think the sequencing is quite similar to the Blackstone audio. The squire in the question, of course, is the son of the knight who told the first tale. And it's unfinished. The squire basically tells us that he's going to tell this epic romance, and he gives us this huge list of things that he's going to say and how he's going to say them with enthusiasm. Novice warrior, lover of enthusiasm. He's going to tell us all this stuff, and he tells us what he's going to tell us for quite some time. And then at some point, someone realizes that this story that he's telling, Genghis Khan, his sons and daughters and all the rest of it, he's taken on more than he can chew. And so he gets interrupted by the Franklin repeatedly throughout the tale. And finally someone steps in and goes, yes, thank you, that was a wonderful story, before he had finished it. Which is kind of funny, and the way some people treat teenagers today too. So there's that. Okay. So the squire was interrupted by the Franklin repeatedly, and I'm pretty sure the Franklin was meant to be the one who tells the tale after him. And Franklin was odd. I had to look that up. So it's a free man. It's not a serf, but it's not noble. So there's a lot of things that could possibly be happening between the non-noble but established Franklin and the nobly born but still very young squire. I don't know what they are. Probably someone out there does. Tell me if you're watching this, if you're a person that knows. Okay, so you've got the next one. The Franklin tells a story about two lovers who decided that their marriage should be one of equal partnership. Though in public they agree that the man of should appear to have overall authority to preserve his status. He then leaves Dorigen alone in France and is worried that his ship will be wrecked on rocks when he comes back from Brittany, England, somewhere. Why exactly he went there, I never really understood. And while he's gone, she's being courted by someone else, and she makes a rash promise that when all the stones on the shore are gone, she will give herself to him. Then there's some sort of magician scholar thing that either removes the rocks or finds the one day of the year where the tide is high enough that the rocks aren't there, and then he comes back to Dorigen, and says, here they are, short, no rocks, fulfill your promise. And then her husband comes back, and we've got this strange sort of shuffling. The magician ends up accepting no payment for his work, because Aurelius let Dorigen off because her husband spoke to her. It was a farce. It was like one of those plays where you've got 2 beds and 5 doors leading to the stage and people just run in and out of all of those things randomly. I couldn't really follow it, but that could have well been the fact that I was driving and concentrating on the road. I feel probably that really the Franklin's Tale deserves coming back to. Okay, then we've got fragment 5, which is also considered group C. It just put after it, and I don't think that in my version it was. We've got the physician and the partner in this one that are clearly linked. The Physician's Tale is an adaptation of a story from Livy in the histories in the Romance of the Rose, and I honestly don't remember it too well. Then you had the Partner's Tale. So the Partner's Tale is largely thought to belong in between the Physician's Tale and the Shipman's Tale from the next grouping. What else was there about the physician? I did write notes for many of these. There's a long discussion on governesses. I remember that. And this was largely considered by Chaucer scholars to be a failure of a tale because the morals were too convoluted. I don't know if the morals were too convoluted or the story was too convoluted, but it certainly wasn't my favourite. Okay, where are we? That was the Physician's Tale, the Partner's Tale. Now, where it was... So the Partner's Tale comes about because the host wants... I didn't say this, I read this. Want something more positive after the Physician's Tale, which was depressing. I'm not sure why that tale was depressing. I didn't find it particularly depressing. But the Partner's is. It is basically talking about his methods of swindling people. I'm pretty sure that I've talked about this one as well, because it's a different order in the audiobooks. But this is about setting out to kill death. So you've got these young men hanging around a village and they're asking what happened to their friend, and he's told, oh, Death took him, and there's, who is this Death? We shall challenge him. It's one of those types of stories, and it's kind of funny. No, it's not Harry Potter. And at the end of the day, they find an old man on the road and they assault him and say, do you know? And he makes some comment about Death coming from him, and they go, is Death your friend? Where is he? Where is he? Direct us to him or we will beat you up, or whatever it was. Something like that. So the old man goes, Death is up on that hill under the tree. So they go there. They find a pot of gold, and it works treasure. And it works upon their greed in such a way that they send one man into town to buy wine. While he's gone, the other two discuss how they will dispose of that man when he gets back, and then divide the treasure between only the two of them. The man who's gone to get wine, meanwhile, thinks if the other two are gone, all that treasure is mine, so he poisons the wine. He gets back, he gets killed by the other two, who then drink deep of the wine, and they all die. I find it, while depressing, it's also surprisingly, again, contemporary, a bit macabre and horrorish, and quite a lot of fun. I like the Partner's Tale. Okay, the Shipman's Tale. I don't remember the Shipman's Tale at all. Notes. Now, in this one, this is B2, and the Shipman's Tale comes towards the end. I feel in the audio, entire fragment B2 or fragment 7 are much higher up in the rating, because the prioress was fairly early on. Okay, we've got a merchant, his wife, and her lover, a monk. And basically, it says similar stories can be found in Boccaccio's Decameron, which is a frequent source for Chaucer's tales. Interestingly enough, I've got that on the shelves. I just haven't got to reading it yet. So it's a young monk who's close friends to the merchant, and he isn't a nice guy and he does bad stuff. That's a pretty small synopsis, but true. Then we have the prioress's tale. Now, I know I've raved about this one already. The prioress is a horrible, horrible woman. The tale is a moral justification. It's hideously anti-Semitic. It is incredibly hate-speechy. And it concerns a wonderful, darling, charming, sugary little blonde-curled boy who was murdered by the evil Jews for no reason that we understand, but is brought back to life by the Virgin Mary. Hated it. The prioress herself came across as a really nasty. But after having listened to it, I found an interesting thing about the Chaucer's tales. What I was saying earlier about Chaucer saying only good things about their people, but describing them in such ways that his listeners or readers might take a different message home. And the prioress was one. The prioress was incredibly richly dressed for her status, so she obviously wasn't taking her vow of chastity seriously. So that one probably deserves more looking into and more reading. After that one, we had Sir Tophus. Sir Tophus is desirous of getting together with the Elf Queen, and this one felt very, very Tuatha De Danann Irish Celtic for me. I'm told that it's meant to be a parody of romances, and that the knight's name is actually Topaz. And I enjoyed that one. It's meant to be mock heroic. Don't know. Okay, next came the Tale of Melody. Now, in this story, the Tale of Melody is just described as what is in it, and it's been edited out. And it is basically a guy's daughter. His house is broken into by his enemies, who put a ladder against the upper window, which seems strangely specific, and get in and do horrible, horrible things to his lovely, darling daughter, who's the prettiest, nicest girl in the village, so bad that she may die. They did all the physical, horrible things to her. Melody wants to go out and take revenge on these people, but his wife, Dame Prudence, talks him out of it by quoting every single person, every saint, every book of the Bible, hundreds of people I've never heard of. Every single person that she can think of, she quotes. It did my head in, and I loathed it. I am not at all surprised it gets edited out of modern editions. Then we had the Monk's Tale. The Monk's Tale and the one after it as well, or the Nun's Priest's Tale, I think. Or at least the Monk's Tale and one other. It was basically a whole heap of stories from historical figures, or historical or mythic figures. So you've got Nebuchadnezzar, you've got Hercules, Samson, Adam, Lucifer, a whole heap of people I've never heard of. Ugolino of Pisa, who I feel I should have heard of, but I can't remember. Nero. It just basically recounts their stories. And that draws into the fact that it has been said by scholars that basically what people in Chaucer's time wanted was not to hear new stories. They wanted to hear the stories they already knew retold. Okay, after that one we've got the Nun's Priest's Tale, and that really confused me because the Nun's Priest's Tale, why does a nun need a priest? That really got me. So there was a fable, and it concerns talking animals reflecting both human perception and fallacy. It felt very Aesop's Fables. And it mainly concerns a rooster called Chantaclia and his favourite wife called Pertelotte. And I'm sure that the Nun's Priest's Tale is meant to get 14th century people in a knowledge base that I don't have. That's all I can really say about that one. Didn't hate it, but it was bewildering. Okay, now we've got Fragment G, which is placed sometimes after Fragment B2, because you've got the Nun's Priest's Tale, and then you've got the second Nun's Tale. Where the first nun went to, I'm still uncertain. Now, the second Nun's Tale is basically this tale of Saint Cecilia, who I've never heard of. Cecilia, wife of Valerian. I think a whole lot of horrible things happened to her, and she ended up thrown into the sea in a boat time after time, and people treated her pretty horribly. It was interesting enough, but didn't love it. The Canon's Yeoman's Tale, however, I did love. So the Canon is apparently a bad guy. His yeoman, what exactly a yeoman is, I had to work at that one for a bit too. But apparently it's someone's man. It's like a journeyman. It's not quite a peasant, and it's certainly not a free man. He works for someone else, and in this case he works for the canon. The canon is an alchemist, and I really love the alchemy part of it. So the canon has all these alchemical things he can do, but he's not a nice guy, and when he finds out that the human is going to tell all his secrets, he runs away. I think it's the canon and the human too that aren't mentioned in the original prologue when Chaucer talks about all the different pilgrims. They must have ridden hard on the road to catch up, and they probably did that even though they knew no one in the party, because the roads were dangerous and two people wouldn't want to travel on their own. Anyhow, all the alchemy things in this seem strangely specific and quite realistic in terms of changing mercury to silver and all these other alchemical things. As a scientist, I enjoyed them considerably. And it is thought that this may have to do with an actual chaplain who Chaucer may well have encountered while he was working for the king in 1390 when he was supervising repairs. So he might have known this chaplain who was making counterfeit gold. And in the story, the canon is actually selling the recipe for making silver to an innocent priest. So yeah, I enjoyed that one. There we go on to the Manciple's Tale. Now, the Manciple's Tale is getting positioned in position 9 or H, and that seems to be where people are confident it is, even though it doesn't seem to have any link to the canon's Human's Tale or the one that comes after it. What exactly a manciple is a purchasing agent for a law court, apparently, maybe, and allegedly. Couldn't quite get my head around it. So, in the prologue to this one, the host tries to rouse the cook, but he's too dead drunk. So the manciple insults the cook, who is then semi-conscious, falls off his horse, and then he gives the cook some more wine as a apology for having insulted him. So the plot of his tale is someone whose name I can't pronounce has a crow which is all white and can speak, and someone, Phoebe whatever, has a wife who he treasures but keeps shut up and is jealous of. Anyway, she cheats on him, as in the vast majority of wives these tales do, and the talking crow tells his master, so he does horrible things to the crow. I don't know what this is meant. Didn't much like the manciple at the end of it. So it's meant to have something to do with Ovid's Metamorphosis, but it's too long since I read that. If I have even ever read it, I'm not sure. I can't remember. It was weird, I didn't like it. But in comparison to Fragment 10 or The Parson's Tale, it was marvellous. I loathed The Parson's Tale. The Parson's Tale, the last one in the book, is meant to be the one in which Chaucer makes up for anything ribald or a little bit insulting that might have happened previously in the other tales, and ensures his listeners know that he's a good guy and it's all quite respectable. It is essentially one long sermon. So the host asks the parson if he would like to tell the next tale, and the parson goes, oh no, we can't tell fables and myth because, quote, some dude or other who I can't remember says that telling fables is evil. And then he goes on to give this long sermon on the deadly sins, and I do not kid you long. It felt like 10 hours. The whole thing wasn't even 22 hours, so it can't have been, but it lasted forever. So first of all, he starts talking about the 7 deadly sins, and Chaucer's it's meant to be a reworking of some Dominican friars, apparently and allegedly. But this parson is a list maker in a way that nothing else in Chaucer's work is. So you've got 7 deadly sins. 7 deadly sins. I don't even know what they are, and I don't care. I'm not Catholic. This is very Catholic. Each one of these sins, however, has subdivisions of, 200 different levels. And within any one of those levels, there are lists and lists of what types of sin and how they can be committed and what the penance should be and who commits them. So in one particular area, you've got this area where he tells, and the types of sins are these. A holy man may commit this sin against the unholy. The holy man may commit this sin against the holy. Or an unholy man might commit this sin against a holy. Or he may commit it against an unholy. It is one long hour after hour of this, and it did my head in. Not totally horrible. There are some moments that were pure laugh out loud, but for the most part, it's long lists of sins and things you should do about the sins and the people who commit the sins. This is going to work well for people who are interested in English medieval Catholicism, origins of religion, or possibly just 14th century history. It didn't really tick any of the boxes for me. But some of the funny things include, there's one part where he's frothing at the mouth about one sin or another. It might well be vanity. People dress too well and encase themselves in too much fabric. Not a problem for me in summer. And they have so much fabric that they could have cut off some of it and given it to the poor, or given the money for that rich fabric to the poor or the church, I seem to recall. And what is worse, if you've got that much fabric, it rubs in the dirt, which is apparently a deadly sin. Who knew? Oh, by the way, there are deadly sins, there are venal sins, and there are at least 2 other types of sins. And he explains all of the categories of mortal or venal sin in excruciating, and I do mean excruciating, detail. If the hell of the Catholics exists, I suspect it's me being sat down and forced to listen to this sermon eternally. I think I would prefer fire. Anyway, so the mortal sins and the venal sins, one of them is worse than the other, whatever. The worst sin of all is apparently saying something bad about God. Murdering your neighbour? No problem. You go, mate. Talking bad about God? Oh no. Or Jesus Christ. And they use the terms interchangeably, but sometimes separately, and I've never understood how Catholics get through that. Oh yes, harking back to poor old Melloby's daughter, who got assaulted to near death and will never be the same again, we assume. That was just fine. As her mother, Dame Prudence, assured him, no punishment should happen to those horrible people who did that, as long as they apparently don't say something bad about God. Oh yes, and back to dress. So, too much fabric is terrible and it's a sin. And the people who wear too much fabric are sinful. But too little fabric is also bad. So the parson absolutely froths at the mouth about those people who cut their trousers so closely that you can practically see the outline of the men's junk. He did not use that word, by the way. Terrible, terrible, sinful people. It is horrible. And worse, much worse, is when they cut the trousers, no, not trousers, not that word either, so tight that you can see their posterior. It puts him in mind of a baboon. It is absolutely sinful. For whatever reason, he froths at the mouth about this a lot. But then it turns out that even more sinful than those really, really tight trousers showing off your junk are tight trousers where one leg is one colour and the other is the other. And the paler colour may look as if you've got nothing covering your junk. I almost went through a red light laughing for this one. Okay, but we haven't finished. Because even worse than the tight trousers and the trousers in 2 different colours is when you've got tight trousers in 2 different colours and a different colour covering your junk. And all this reminds me, pleasantly, of a very good historical parade I watched on Visby, Gotland, in Sweden one year. Renaissance? I think it was Renaissance, where they've got those fantastic costumes that do just that. Different colours of legs, cod pieces out the wazoo, feathers and froth. But apparently, very sinful. Very, very sinful. Another beauty from the Parson's Tale, before I finally decided I could bear with it no longer and skipped ahead, was the... So... we got a lot of talk about sex and how bad it is, right? All the different variations of any kind of person who has sex with any other kind of person, including whoremasters, including people having sex with relatives. But apparently, even when you're lawfully wedded, though that is, of course, we hear a lot about how you should be lawfully wedded, even if a man and wife lawfully wedded are in bed together, that can still be sinful if they're enjoying it. Apparently, you're not meant to enjoy it. What you're meant to do is you're meant to do it while thinking about Jesus Christ. Because he tells us, if Jesus Christ is not present in that marriage bed with the man and wife while they're doing their thing, that is also sinful. And I've got to say, I can't think of anything creepier than a man and his wife doing it with Jesus Christ sitting on the edge of the bed, watching them. Yay, can't make this stuff up. So after that, final afterward is the Little Humble. And Chaucer comes across as a really nice, humble guy. I feel like maybe this fragment was written towards the end of his life, and he may have known he didn't have forever long, and he's asking the reader to forgive him if he is a sinner, if he is in any way offended, and may Jesus Christ have mercy on his soul for having whatever. It's actually a little bit sweet in a way. Okay, so Blackstone audiobook, put this one together in 2008. I listened to it in action. It is, and I supplemented it with my real life copy. The audio was rendered into modern English by J.U. Nicholson, and it had a lot of narrators. Martin Jarvis did Chaucer, J. Cairns did the Knight, Ray Border did the Miller, the Summoner, and the Monk, John Reeve did the Reeve, haha, very funny, the Physician, the Nun's Priest, Malcolm Hill Gardner did the Cook, the Merchant, the Pardoner, the Canon's Yeoman, Ralph Casham did the Lawyer, Amelia White did a fantastic job with the Wife of Bath, Alison, Matthew Wolfe did the Prior, the Squire, the Sailor, and the Manciple, Simon Vance did the Clerk, Kenneth Dansinger did the Merchant, W. Morgan Shepherd did the Franklin, Carolyn Seymour did the Prioress, Rosalind Deans did the Second Nun, Danes, I think, Mark Bramhall did the Parson. And I'm mentioning that because it's really, really hard to get a sense of who did what in this audiobook. Overall, did I enjoy it? Overall, I did, except for the 15 minutes that I really could not cope with any more of The Parson's Tale. I'm glad I read it. I enjoyed the things I read about it while I was reading it. I'm glad that I listened to parts of the Middle English sung by people who know how to pronounce that stuff. It was really interesting. It was really invigorating. This first time going all the way through was very valuable to me. Should you do it? Doubtful. There's a lot of things in here that would probably mostly appeal to people who are omnivorous readers or specifically studying this area. It will be hard for other people. But what might not be hard is if you pick this up and you read the prologue, and you read all the prologues of the individual tales and the epilogues and the bits around, you would get a fascinating and wonderful sense of history and place. And if, having read those, you decided you want to go in and read some of the individual ones, and I strongly recommend The Wife of Bath as one of them, you could do that. I don't think that you should lightly commit to reading the whole thing cover to cover, especially not Mellaby's Tale. Oh, that was horrible. The Prioress's Tale and The Parson's Tale. Those three were absolutely pass, to be honest. But some of them, like The Wife of Bath, The Friar and the Summoner, The Miller and the Reeve, quite a few of them are a lot of fun. So I think you can get a lot out of reading them individually. If you want to listen to it as an audiobook, I think you'll need another book going at the same time to keep you sane. But I am very glad to have got through this. This is probably the longest review I've ever done, and it isn't even the only one on Chaucer's Tales, on Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. But realms have been written and said about this, mostly by far more knowledgeable people than me. So go and listen to some of those people who actually know their history and their Middle England. I am just an innocent bystander, as it were. Thank you for watching this innocent bystander, omnivorous reader's opinion of the Canterbury Tales. Read good books.